All right. Thank you so much. Welcome for coming on the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Do you really quickly want to introduce yourself in your own words? Like, who are you and what do you do?
Sure. My name is Candolin Cook. I'm the co-editor of Edible New Mexico,
Hmm.
which is a bi-monthly magazine here in New Mexico, all over the state. And we focus on local food season by season, the people who make the food, the people who eat the food, social justice when it comes to food, environmental issues.
Nice.
Um, and then I am also an associate editor currently at the New Mexico Historical Review,
Okay.
which is a scholarly magazine out of the University of New Mexico, where
Hmm.
I am a PhD candidate in
Hmm.
history and I study the American
So what do you not do?
West. Right now, I don't go outside much, but
Yes, I can relate. How's that going for
yeah.
you, by the way? Are you able to work on, are you dissertating right now, or are you in your process?
I'm dissertating. I actually just received a Belinsky Fellowship, which is
Hmm.
going to allow me to take the time over the next year. I'm going to be stepping down from my role at the New Mexico Historical Review,
Hmm.
and I'll be transitioning to a different role at the magazine, which will allow me to work on my dissertation almost exclusively for the next year.
That's awesome. That's
So
really
I'm
good.
doing Thanks. Yeah, so right now I'm just kind of working at home and trying to wrap my head around this huge project and not
Mhm.
become completely overwhelmed and catatonic. And, I definitely take like long breaks now.
Mhm.
I work for a bit in the morning and then I go watch The Real Housewives of New York City and try not to be thoughtful at all, which is
Nice.
a great place to do that.
That's yeah, it's a perfect time, and it's a good way to unplug and just
Yeah.
kind of zone out for a little while. Does your you do have a history of writing. You do have kind of professional history of writing. Is that something that's
Yeah.
translated very well towards your academic career?
I always thought it would, but so I write for the magazine
Hmm.
and I write about food. And, I've written some, shorter history pieces over the years. And then, of course, for school. But trying to tackle this dissertation, which I'm trying to make into a book, it's
Yeah.
a narrative history, which is a little different than what some of my colleagues do, which is a little bit more
Mm.
theoretical.
Okay.
So trying to wrap my head around how to tell the story that I'm going to tell in a coherent way in 80,000 words instead of 2,000 words that I usually write. It's intimidating for sure. I kind
Yeah.
of wish I was like a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more like confident in being able to do that. But I think I'll just, as it goes along, just take
Uh-huh.
it piece by piece, maybe try and approach it a little bit like a magazine article, just like a whole bunch of them strung together. So,
However you can break it down and make it easier for you, I guess that's the best way to go about it.
right.
um
Yeah.
there's so many different. I did do some recon, a deep dive as some would call it, and I was like, who is this
That's good.
individual I'm gonna be? It's scary. Is that what you said?
It's like find all like the, things I wish didn't exist anymore, pictures from high school. You never know.
I mean, I'm gonna show it all. No, I'm just kidding. No, but no, I mean, there's so many layers to you. You're such an interesting individual, and it's I could start in a couple of different places, but I always find myself kind of moving, kind of backtracking a little bit. So let's start off on you. Like, where are you from originally?
I was born and raised in Sedona, Arizona,
Okay.
which for my money is the most beautiful place in the world. So I feel
Hmm.
very lucky to have been there in the 80s before it's become overrun with tourists.
Oh.
So I lived there in the surrounding area until I was 16. And then I moved to Ashland, Oregon, which is in Southern Oregon,
Mm-hmm.
and lived there, went to college, finished high school there until I was about 25. And then I moved to New York City, lived in Brooklyn, worked in fashion merchandising,
Hmm.
and was just really not. I got my undergrad in Oregon and I got it in history,
Okay.
but working in fashion in New York, which I thought would be a lot like Sex in the City or something, like very glamorous.
Yeah.
New York was just not for me. I felt just not intellectually stimulated
Mm,
and a little overstimulated in other areas. So
hmm.
I just started looking for a graduate program to take my history career seriously.
Okay.
And I applied to ASU and UNM. I got into both. ASU gave me money and UNM did not. So I had planned on going to Tempe.
Hmm.
And right when I was about to get on the plane to go back home to New York after these kind of site visits at these schools, who would become my mentor at UNM, Dr. Paul Hutton, called me because he wasn't there when I did the site visit and
Hmm.
basically convinced me to move to Albuquerque. So I made like a
What did he
last
say? Like,
second
what happened?
decision. He just kind of said all the right things that I wanted to do. I knew I probably wouldn't be a professor, which is the normal um, career trajectory for someone who gets a PhD. At
Hmm.
that point, I hadn't even had a master's. And he's like, you don't need to do that. You can do whatever you want to do. And he's someone who does historical consultation for films. He's
Mm,
written screenplays. He's written
mm,
books that are with commercial presses, not just with academic presses.
nice.
And he's like, if your passion is storytelling, then you can do that here and
Yeah.
we'll help foster that for you. And then besides that, I just really liked Albuquerque. It was my first time coming here and
Mm,
visiting.
hmm.
And I found, no offense to my home state, but I find Phoenix dismal. So I
I
was
mean, I
a little
don't,
easily convinced.
I don't
I wanted to come
disagree.
here anyway.
It's so unbearably hot, and
It is so not okay hot.
I mean,
I
absolutely,
remember one
it's yeah.
time, yeah, I was going to say one time I remember visiting a friend of mine, my best friend Emma, who was at U of A in Tucson.
Hmm.
And, I grew up in Arizona, but I grew up in northern Arizona, central
Hmm.
northern.
Hmm.
And so I hadn't really spent any time in Tucson. And we were staying in her apartment, which was an attic apartment. And she said, oh, for night it gets really hot because I don't have like central air. So you're going to have to sleep with a water baby. And I was like, what is a water baby? And sure enough, it was so unbearably hot. She was like, here's your water baby. And it was a frozen jug of water. And we just like slept in our underwear holding frozen jugs of water because it was so hot. And I
Water
was like,
baby.
I cannot. A little water baby, but you like spoon at night. So I was like, I can't hack it.
You literally have to
Um,
sleep with a giant ice cube to be able to. Were you able to sleep
yes,
even?
it was actually quite nice. I
Oh,
highly recommend if your swamp cooler is not working efficiently, freeze
yeah.
some water and cuddle that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess that's one way to do it. That's a weird way to do it, but for future reference for all you listening out
Yes,
there,
yes.
life hack.
Um, so anyway, yeah, I moved
Yeah.
here in the summer of 2011
Hmm.
and um, did my master's and I'm in my PhD program, hopefully with 1 year left, finally. It's a long,
Mm.
long program. I think history PhDs is like the longest program next to medical doctors, except for when you're a medical doctor, you end up getting a job like when it's over and like money, and it's a real
Yeah.
crapshoot for us. And then I also got married. And so my
Wow.
husband is a farmer. He owns Vita Verde
Nice.
Farm up in the North Valley. So that's the
Where
other thing
is
I've been
that?
doing lately for,
Yeah.
do you know where Los Poblanos is?
Yeah.
Los
Yeah.
Poblanos. He just in that area, like right next door. So he's got 5 or 6 acres kind of spread across the North Valley,
Mm.
sells organic vegetables. And
Cool.
so, yeah, I've been working over there on Wednesdays for our CSA pickup. We had to kind of transition from just selling to restaurants to direct to consumer after everything went down and the
Yeah.
restaurants,
Yeah.
closed or cut down on their expenses. So, yeah, it's been a crazy time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so you kind of just skipped over a lot. I mean, how long is
Yeah.
the program typically that you're in on average?
It varies. It took me 3 years to get my master's, and
Mm.
then PhD. This will be my going into my 6th year. And so it typically takes, I mean, some freaks of nature have done it in 4, but taking 7 is not unusual at all.
Hmm.
So yeah, and I think also starting to work with Edible and the magazine has kind of made me put some stuff on the back burner. So it's probably taken a little bit longer than it should have, in all honesty. But
Okay. I
it's
mean, yeah,
a
you
long
have to live
slog.
your life. You have to live your life, and academia, it has a way of just kind of getting under your skin and really consuming everything in your life. And but I mean, you got to find those outlets, right?
If I didn't have any output over these last,
Yeah.
gosh, 8 years of the whole program, 9 years almost, I would have lost my mind, because a lot of what happens is you spend years and years writing on a topic.
Hmm.
Maybe at the end you can publish something that people will read.
Hmm.
And by people, I mean like 4 people. And you don't get a lot of immediate gratification.
Hmm.
So for me, being able to have an outlet where I'm able to do something that is creative and I have an output into the world and people read it and give me immediate feedback, was just important, I think, to
Hmm.
my
Hmm.
soul, because it
Yeah.
would have been really hard not to. I think also, like, I didn't really know that I could write well enough until I,
Hmm.
like,
Really?
if I was just insular in school, like, my professors once in a while would be like, "Oh, this is well done," but having an outlet where people are like, "I like that thing that you read," it's just like
Hmm.
such like a warm feeling to be like, "Wow, like I did something and someone enjoyed it,"
Yeah.
which I think I feel bad for like some of my colleagues that have no idea if anything that they spend, years on will reach the public. So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
that's graduate school for you. You just get used to that kind of constant just echo chamber and criticism of no, wrong. What's the
Well,
theory
even
here?
when people who, yeah, I mean, one of the things that's always like disheartening for me is that even when people, historians,
Hmm.
do put out a book that's well done and well received, it's kind of our job in our seminars, in our critiques, in our book reviews, in our, at the journal that I work at, to kind of tear it apart,
Yeah.
which obviously, like, there needs to be discussion and there needs to be critique, but I feel like a lot of times, instead of being positive and focusing on what the contribution was,
Hmm.
people will pick apart what they didn't get to. And I think that's more of an ego thing for the person doing the critiquing, because they're like, "Oh, you didn't talk about this aspect, therefore I'm smarter than you because I found the thing that you're weak in," that kind of a thing. So
Yeah.
it's kind of
Yeah.
a vicious cycle of like negative reinforcement sometimes.
Isn't it great?
You're like, "I did a thing," and people are like, "Cool, here's what you didn't do though." But
Yeah, yeah. Can I ask you what's your dissertation on? What are you focusing on? What intrigues
mhm.
you in that aspect?
So, I'm a terrible elevator pitch person, but to bring it down, my dissertation is focused on an incident that happened on the border of Arizona and Sonora in the late 1920s. There was a Mexican boy who was kidnapped by Apaches who were still living in the Sierra Madres off reservation, descendants from Geronimo. And this is, very much like in modern times. This is around 1930.
Hmm.
So when this happened, the boy's father went to Douglas, Arizona to try and get some help from local townspeople and local authorities, because the
Hmm.
Mexican government wasn't doing much to help recover his son.
Yeah.
And so the citizens of Douglas, instead of trying to form a posse to help this man, saw it as a publicity opportunity for their town. It had just been hit by the Great Depression, and they
Hmm.
decided to mount this expedition to wipe out the remaining, quote, wild Apaches, and advertise this across the country and try to get rich white Eastern men to come live out these kind of like Indian fighter fantasies.
What?
Um,
It's like Westworld.
and it's 100% like Westworld, except for in Westworld, the robots, and in this case, the real human beings. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Right.
they called it a great safari. They referred to the Apaches as big game. So it's a exploration on race and popular culture and what the meaning of the myth of the West is and how that translated into violent avenues. And
Wow.
then it's about border relations and this kind of confluence of modernity and a mythic past in a
Mm-hmm.
Western space. So it's a really crazy story. There's a
Yeah.
ton of other aspects to it that I won't get into now because it'll take forever. But it's definitely wild, and I
Uh-huh.
think it's just like a real just intersection of all these things that were happening at the time. People
Right.
were feeling white men especially were feeling kind of like emasculated because of like you know the rising urbanism, and we no longer had this frontier for them to like act out these kind of like rugged individualistic um you know
Mm.
social constructs. And so and these Eastern men like never did anything like that, but they grew up reading Westerns. They grew up, like this is kind of
Right.
like the dawn of cinema. And so people are like, this is my chance to go kind of be a cowboy. And so it's kind of like about what's going on here and what's kind of going on in like the hearts and minds of, Anglo Americans with,
Mm-hmm.
beams at this time. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And then besides that, it's just kind of an incredible story.
I mean, it is. I didn't know it for one, and then that's insane that that happened. I mean, it seems so outlandish that I compared it to a TV show that it was
Yeah.
based with, and I'm like, wow, no, it's actually real life. That's actually
Yeah.
happened, and that can, I mean, to an extent, like, I mean, that continues to happen. I mean, you're a historian. Do you see it? A lot of these things repeating themselves.
Well, one of the things that I keep kind of drawing on as a parallel to modern day is this idea of the border and
Mm.
this imaginary line
Mm-hmm.
that people are like, once you cross this line, all of a sudden you're in this kind of like, lawless, like barbarous area, like, and
Mm-hmm.
so I think to this day, Americans like think that, like, Mexico is like an other of what's going on here. And so you
Mm-hmm.
have someone like, not to get too political, but to have the president say like, oh, we can't have open borders because, like these like violent people are going to cross the border and commit violence on the US side. Well, like here's an instance of Americans taking up arms, trying to cross the southern border in order to commit violence for essentially recreation. So it's just a
Right.
wild story.
Yeah.
And
It's so interesting. Yeah.
and and I think that area, especially here in the Southwest,
Yeah.
there's so many ties economically, culturally, kinship ties,
Mm-hmm.
families, that in that area, like it was very porous. Like they would cross the border freely at that time, and they didn't really differentiate so much between, like a family on one side of the border and the family on the other.
Mm.
And they worked together, like the mining industry. There was the mines in Sonora and the smelter factories in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So people kind of were seeing it as this kind of like more porous area, and over time like that line has just gotten more and more rigid.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that mean, and what does that mean for those relationships and how people view themselves on those border areas?
I mean, yeah, it calls to attention so many things. The idea of border and security and open border versus closed border. I mean, it's yeah, it doesn't exist, right? So you're absolutely right. That's so interesting. I'd love to read your dissertation when you're done with it.
I really hope it can be a book someday. That's kind of
Yeah,
like my main goal. Is like I
yeah,
really want to write something that people read. That would be that would
yeah.
be the best.
Mm,
And then the movie rights, of course. Then we
right,
can
of
get the.
course. Would you want to direct it?
No, I would not want to direct it because it would be terrible. But I would be super down to be a screenwriter. So we'll,
Okay, okay.
let's option the movie rights before I've written a word of the actual dissertation. So
Yeah, let's do that. I think
yeah.
a big part of why I asked you on here is because I did read some of your stuff, and there's I guess what comes to mind is that you didn't really have any formal writing training. Is that what's happened? Is you just kind of started?
Yeah, none at all.
Okay. How
Yeah,
did
I
that
didn't have an
process?
English
Yeah.
totally by accident.
Okay.
I never even took an English class in college. And then, I mentioned that I didn't have any funding when I came here to UNM.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, the New Mexico Historical Review hires graduate students. And
Mm.
so when I came here, Dr. Durwood Ball in the history department is the editor there, and he offered me a job, and I said, "Great, I would love it. I need a job. I don't I don't know anything about writing, essentially." And so I learned on the job all those kind of like mechanical things.
Okay.
And I've been working there for 8 years almost. I'm just finishing up there. And it was a great experience. And I learned so much about how to write and how not to write, editing other people's
Mm-hmm.
very clumsy sentences. And then, and then I just kind of, it's funny, I didn't write much in undergrad. And then we had to write like a final paper, like a capstone or whatever it's called, thesis. And I wrote about this story that happened in Oregon, a kind of sensational murder trial.
Hmm.
And I gave it to my professor, and I remember him handing it back to me, and like every single sentence was like underlined in red and like rewritten in like red pen. And he said, "This story is great. You have like a great ear and eye for like what makes an interesting story. Everything that you write is in passive voice." And I said, "What's passive voice?" And so that was really like my first foray. And so I reworked that paper, and then that's what I submitted to UNM to be my writing sample. And one of the professors there, Virginia Scharf, was having a writing class, like a writing for
Mm-hmm.
historians class. And she was like, "Oh, I read your story that you submitted, and it was great, and you have your own voice." And I was like, "Really?" And it just like
Yeah.
having a mentor give you like that kind of like
Yeah.
positive feedback can just
Uh-huh.
mean the world to people, because it gave me the confidence to keep writing. And I wrote in that class. And then
Yeah.
when I was working at the historical review, the co-editor of Edible New Mexico, Willie Carlton, was my colleague there. And
Mm-hmm.
he asked me to write a story for them. And I wrote a story, and they liked it. And then they asked me to come be a copy editor. I did that for a couple months. And then they offered me to be co-editor with Willie. So it was just kind of like, if I'm giving advice to like would be writers, like this is
Mm-hmm.
probably not going to happen to you. It was just a real happy accident for me.
You're like, "No, yeah, good luck, but no, I'm the exception,
Yeah,
not the rule."
I think I just really lucked out, to be honest. I didn't think it was like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not like a great writer phenom or anything like that. I just was kind of like in the right place at the right time. And because my husband's a farmer, I think they saw that I had like a unique lens for how to look to food and local food and where your food comes from. So they kind of
Okay.
gave me that opportunity.
Do you met your
Yeah,
husband here?
I did.
It's so
Yeah,
interesting.
he's also he's a New Yorker, which is funny because I moved here from New York, and when I first moved here, I had like no friends, obviously, because I didn't know a soul. And I this is like pre like internet dating, but I was on
Mm.
Facebook and I saw his like little picture pop up with a mutual friend, because they're like people you might know or whatever.
Right,
And
right.
I liked his mustache, and so I shot him a friend request. So
You
that was
just
it.
shot a stranger with a mustache. I mean, back in the day, that would have been a
I
big no-no.
know, so weird. But I clicked on his picture and it said he was a farmer and he was from New York City. So I was
You're
just like,
like, it
oh,
just
like,
stars aligned, huh?
cool. Yeah. So that's how we met. Yeah.
That's cool. Do you mind if I bring up one little caption that you wrote that I really enjoyed? And
Sure.
I'm gonna share my screen with you.
Okay.
Let's see if I can bring it up real quick. That's not it. Where is it? There it is. And it's this. I think it's the last one you wrote. It was August last year, and it's all about eating alone. and we can kind of talk about
Yeah.
it a little bit, but I'll just read it out loud for the listeners. Other recent articles and alarmist op-eds have purported that there is a correlation between the rise of solo dining and a national epidemic of loneliness, as well as a deterioration of family values. Think pieces on the death of the family dinner and the snackification of meals suggest we are a society too absorbed in our own busy lives to appreciate how communal eating is crucial to civilization, as Michael Pollan has said. What I think these hand wringers are missing, however, is that perhaps more people are discovering the pleasures of eating alone. Whether it is out of necessity or by choice, consuming a meal alone in public or private contains its own unique joys. I hope I did it some justice by reading it there. But yeah, I mean, I read that and I was like, this is such a great little paragraph. It really,
Thank you.
especially the hand wringing. I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's especially that's exactly what they're doing. What?
Well, I think this whole nation is a nation of hand wringers about all kinds of stuff. If there's anything you can be worried about, they're gonna try and make it into some kind of like,
Mm-hmm,
you know,
mm-hmm,
culture war that, you know, and I don't have any kids yet.
mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people are so concerned about like the family dinner and all of these
Yeah,
things and the kind of deterioration of family values and all these kind of traditional things, which
right.
sure, but also like I'm just like a big proponent on like enjoying your own company. And I always
Yeah.
have been, and I've always been a little bit of a misanthrope. So
I mean, if you kind of get to that at the beginning of the whole thing, you mentioned Sex in the City for one, which is you talked about earlier before moving to New York, you know, and I think that's yeah, there's that episode where Samantha's just sitting there by herself, and it reminds me specifically of a conversation I had with a cousin of mine, and she said to me, "You're gonna go eat alone? That's so sad." And
yeah,
I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, you can't eat by yourself? She said, no, that's weird. I said, well, I mean, what's sadder? I mean, the fact that like you will or you refuse to eat unless you're sitting with somebody else, right? Or me,
right.
if I'm hungry, I'm just going to sit down and eat, regardless of where I am. Any
Hmm.
thoughts on that?
Well, I mentioned in that article in the beginning that when I lived in New York City, which is kind of, you know, one of the great food
Mm-hmm.
capitals of the world, that
Mm-hmm.
I ate 99% of my meals alone
Yeah.
because I did have a boyfriend at the time, but he didn't really see the value in going out to eat. He wasn't like a food person, quote unquote. And so I was like, well, screw it, dude. Like, I'm still like, we're in New York.
Yeah.
I'm going to
Heck
go eat.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I ate like a ton of great meals on my
Mm-hmm.
own
Mm-hmm.
there. And then I still really like it. It doesn't really intimidate me, I think, in a way
Mm.
that it intimidates other people. And I think it's just a stigma that if someone sees you eating alone, they think it's because you have no friends, which is not the case.
Yeah.
People are busy. And I do love to go eat with other people. I love having a great,
Um,
you know, dinner party and dinner conversation.
yeah.
But I'm never going to be like, well, I can't do this because I'm by myself. And I feel the same way about doing anything. I go to concerts alone, I go to movies alone. Some people
Mm-hmm.
think that's sad. You know, I've had conversations with my husband who just thinks it's who would like never go see a movie by himself. And I'm like, but what if nobody wants to go see it with you? I'm not going to just not go see something or go see an artist that I want to see.
Yeah.
So I'm pro, and I think kind of the point of that article too is, you know, I think a lot of times we'll go to like fast casual restaurants alone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's lunchtime, we'll go to a deli, we'll, you know,
Yeah.
go to the frontier, even, you know, if you're at UNM or whatever, and grab something by yourself. But in that article, I went and ate at Campo, which is probably like the fanciest, you know, restaurant in town. And I had a great time and I had really good food and I sat at the bar, which makes you feel like a little less, you know, like you're taking up space from other
Mm-hmm.
people. And
Mm-hmm.
just, I love to people watch, which is like,
Yeah.
you know, can be a really good time too. And bring something to eat, whatever. I
I mean,
mean, bring
it,
something to read. I mean,
and I was like, well, I mean, bring your own food, I guess. I mean, that's an insult to the chef, but
no,
uh,
I meant while you eat, bring something
yeah,
to read and in that Sex
Yeah,
and the City episode I mentioned, there was like this, like, you know, like, don't play on your phone, don't read something, just kind of
right.
sit in your space, which is like cool if you want to do that, but also like I don't think there's any shame like if you want to scroll you know, Instagram while you eat it, like whatever you got to do to stay
Yeah,
entertained.
yeah. And I think you touched on the fact that like in Albuquerque, that's a thing where it's not as common. It's becoming more common. I think
Mhm.
you're right. I can't remember how long ago, but I had this discussion with somebody about eating. Again, it was eating alone, and something that kind of comes up a lot for me because I do it a lot. I'm a single guy. I have my kids, and when they're not with me, I'm just on my own, and I'm hungry, and I don't
Mhm.
feel like cooking for one. So, you mentioned
Yeah.
Mangocoto, which is a really great place, and it's great for solo
Oh,
dining
it's
as
the
well.
best.
But that
Right.
specific place, and then I think Pokey Pokey, those like
Mhm.
almost Asian style places tend to be a more friendly environment for solo eating. And I think you mentioned South Korea as well, um,
Mhm.
because people do sit down and eat by themselves a lot because it's people are single and they want to eat good food and they don't want to be stuck at home, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I want to say there's a beauty to it, right? Like you kind of
Right.
there's a joy, like a unique joy you said, but I think it's beauty in the sense that like you can appreciate the meal on your own. You don't have to fill the empty space. You can just exist. If you do get
Right.
anxious enough by yourself, just pull out your phone and start scrolling. Maybe that'll help a little bit. But then you start noticing the other solo diners. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, I had like I'm thinking of one at Sister Bar. I went for taco night. I wanted tacos and I just wanted to go. And I'm like, nobody's coming with me. I'll go by myself. And I sat there, grabbed a drink, got some tacos, and the people down the road from me were just like by themselves as well. And it was a businesswoman, different people from different walks of life. They're just like, I'm hungry, I don't want to go home, I'm gonna eat by myself. And there's kind of like this weird connection, right? Like we're being human
Mhm.
together. I'm never gonna see you
Right.
again. Maybe I will, but I won't remember. But I think
Yeah.
that there is a joy and a uniqueness to it that you don't get if you're constantly distracting yourself with somebody else.
Right. I do think there's like a little bit of a gender divide as well for when you're a woman and you go to a bar by yourself or you go out to eat alone.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, where was I? I was at like Einstein Bagels by
Yeah.
school, and I was waiting for my bagel to go to class. And there was a man there, and he comes over and he's like, "Would you like to join me and like have lunch?" And I'm like, no, thank you, sir. And then he got kind of like annoyed that I was like on my own. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, no, I'm just like getting food. And when I used to live by Joe's or Carrero's
Oh yeah, I love Joe's.
over
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
I used to live on Princeton, and I'd walk over there all the time and just
Mm-hmm.
get like a drink or whatever at the bar. And then it was just like open season. Like people are like, "Oh, you're
Oh.
here because you want to meet people," and it's like, no, I just like wanted to drink and get out of the house. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's like my one kind of caveat. That's It's a little different for women sometimes because
Oh
it
yeah.
feels like an invitation when it certainly is not.
No, absolutely, I
Sometimes you
absolutely
just want to go
agree.
on your own.
Absolutely agree
Um,
that that time at Sister, that was that woman that I mentioned, and I was gonna leave it out until you said this, but that woman I mentioned, there was a guy that was lingering
uh-huh.
and kind of in the background, and he came up to her and he was just like laying it on,
Mm-hmm.
and like hey, like how's it going, you come here off, like, and she was just like heart, like wall, it's like brick
Yeah.
wall, ignoring him, being like nope. She gave him his name,
Yeah.
she was like even that was a mistake. And part of me was just like, should I say something? I'm like, no, I think I'd make it worse if I say something. I'm just gonna leave this alone. And I just felt so awkward and bad for her because I'm like, this doesn't happen to guys. it,
No.
it just
And
doesn't.
like I don't have, I'm not angry at dudes for like shooting their shot, but it's like you gotta read the room. And so
Yeah,
if someone has like their face down, looking at their phone, reading a book, like seems pretty content, or if you
yeah,
go over and
yeah.
you introduce yourself and they don't engage, like you gotta read it, man. You gotta,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I've even in situations where I thought they were out of my league, I've even said, "Hey, listen, I'm going to shoot my shot here. do you want to like grab a drink? And one was just laughed and said no, but thank you. The other one said yeah. So like I just lead with like I'm
Yeah.
shooting my shot. Like I know that this is
Yeah.
weird, so totally call me out. But yeah, no, this guy. I'm just to set the some more context. This guy was just a weirdo, a creep, and it was not welcome, and it was just weird. But yeah, I
Yeah.
mean the solo dining, and I think your writing is very um it is good. I think I'm trying to do some writing as well for the company I work for, and doing some. We have a giant blog or whatever, but you're one of the few writers that I really kind of look to really kind of reference, if that makes sense. Like because you have to when you're
Very
blogging or doing
sweet.
anything like that, of course. And it's one of those things where you're just like you have to bring yourself into the story somehow, right?
Hmm.
And I was maybe 2 to 3 paragraphs in before I realized what you were doing, right? And I was like, oh wow, like I thought I was just reading about her, and then I'm like, oh okay, solo dining, and all this stuff, and it is good. And there's a beauty to writing, to telling story, looking at history, being able to really relay that to a different audience, whether it's in film or in different ways. The concept and being able to understand that, like that's what I think your professors may be saying is like, the writing could be workshopped. It could always get better, but like it takes a very special person to be able to kind of appreciate good writing or know a good story when they see one.
I'm all about unique voice as well.
Okay.
So, as an editor, when people send in pieces for me, it's less concerning for me if everything is grammatically correct
Mm-hmm.
because we can fix that. We have editors, we have copy editors, we can massage that. I will always rather work on the mechanics of writing with someone than trying to teach someone how to have a point of view and how to have a unique voice, because that is just a lot more just inherent to who you are. And you can't just, it's not easy to teach that to people. And
Mm-hmm.
I have
Mm-hmm.
had people, I do like really like admire the kind of writers who can switch and do different types of style of
Oh
writing
yeah,
and can,
yeah, yeah.
take different things for different, projects. But one thing that people told me in the beginning was that they can always tell it's me. And so they're like,
Hmm.
you only write in your voice. And I said, well, I'm not really smarter to write in anybody else's. Like, so I don't know if that's a skill or just like, it's
Yeah.
impossible to me to like not, oh, and they would say like, I talk like how I write how I talk. And I was just like, yeah, I can't really like divorce those two things.
Yeah.
So maybe
Yeah.
it's like not actually a compliment, but to me,
Hmm.
if someone has a sense of humor or someone has a point of view or someone has something that just like makes it unique to them, that's like always someone I'd rather hire to work at to write articles for the magazine. Um, because it's easy to phone something in and make it sound like,
Hmm.
whoever blog piece, food writing, whoever you're trying to be. But it's just far more interesting if you sound like yourself.
Yeah, I mean, and they're gonna follow you for you, right? Whether it's I had to learn that through podcasting, but also there's certain writers I like because I feel like I'm friends with them. And
Oh,
there's
totally.
right, you're just like you're just like this writing. I can't wait till his next piece comes out or her piece comes out because you can just like relate to them and you hear their voice, right? You hear their voice even if you don't know what it
Do
sounds
you
like.
do the thing when you've been reading something that you'll start to narrate your own life in the cadence that is the book that you've been reading or the person? Like,
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. I
like
mean,
my inner monologue starts to, like, if I'm really into a piece of writing or like a book, all of a sudden I'm just kind of like thinking in um that style, just like takes on a more.
absolutely. I mean, the tone and the cadence of the writing. Sometimes it's sometimes the story itself. I find it just relating to it so intensely. I'm just like, this is my life, and it's it starts playing out, and you're like, okay, this is what the character did. Maybe this is just kind of a signal for me to kind of maybe go something about this way.
Right.
I mean, beautiful. I think if it's good, it's beauty. I think is it's subjective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So good writing is subjective as well. You're gonna, if you enjoy something and you find it, really, really, you find it resonating with you, it's because it's becoming a part of you, and it's a part of you forever moving forward, right? And
Yeah.
it's, I mean, you have to remember that, yeah, if the person that is reading this if they become a fan, is they're following it because of you, and they're
Mm-hmm.
following your writing. Maybe the individual piece will get some, random outliers. They just read it for the sake of just kind of reading a good article, but um, they're like with this podcast, like I quote unquote am the narrator, right? And I carry it through, so
Mm-hmm.
people listen back episode after episode, unless you choose to come back. I mean, Taya's come back like 3 times, right? And people really enjoy her. I
Uh-huh.
tried to do a few episodes, like we were going to do our own podcast, but like that fell through, and it's not a big deal. But yeah, it's like she's also very good at like being her own brand, telling her own story, and people like how she tells her story, and it's very inspiring, and all of the above, right?
She's very thoughtful.
Yes.
She's a very deep individual. She's far deeper than I am.
She's very deep. She's I consider her a great friend, and she's wonderful, and it's always, I don't walk away from a conversation with her without just feeling better, you know
Yeah.
and I think that's what we look for. That's what we look for in writing and art and in content and whatever. In your dissertation, so, yeah, something to relate to.
Yeah. And my taste in what I read really runs a gamut, and I feel like I have really good taste in nonfiction and history,
Hmm.
and just the worst taste in fiction. Like I'm talking like Sookie Stackhouse, like True Blood vampire stories, and just
Nice.
like full trash. And then I also just read a lot of just like pop culture stuff that like would probably be pretty embarrassing if people went through like my browser
Jeez,
history and
get
knew
out
that
of
I
here.
was like reading I don't know. It's just a
Yeah.
lot of that kind of stuff. So it's not like I'm like over here like just reading, like, Moby Dick or anything.
I mean, have you read Moby Dick?
It's on the list, but I have not.
I bought the book
I did
recently.
just
Yeah.
read But I did just read the New York Times article about the oral history of Mad Max Fury Road. So you can talk about that all day. You can talk
Oh,
about celebrity gossip, but Moby Dick, maybe not so much. No Voltaire, you know.
nothing like that, huh? Okay. I
We
mean,
can't all be deep.
and they can. I mean, they don't all have to be deep, right? I think it's just there's something for everyone, and I admire your writing. I was like, oh wow, it's been a while since you've written, so um,
It has, yeah.
hopefully
I've I've been
you put something
trying.
out soon. Do you have a blog?
Gosh, no. I have been writing just for school. I made a conscious choice last summer to take a step back from writing for the magazine, and I've just been doing
Mm,
editing, and
hmm.
I write like the letter from the editor and like little supplemental pieces, but
Yeah.
nothing for real. And I do miss it quite a bit, but this project is going to be so hard, and I have such for a historian, I have a terrible memory. So for me to work on a project like this and then take 2 weeks off to write something for the magazine and then try and come
Hmm.
back and try to remember where like my train of thought was is just not practical for me.
Okay.
And so I think just this next year, I'm just going to devote everything I can to like making this dissertation as close to a book as I can, so that when
Yes.
I try and, submit it to different publishers, that it doesn't have to be completely rewritten from scratch.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's my plan, and I'm going to be taking a little bit of a step back from Edible. That I'll be a consulting editor, but not
Hmm.
co-editor right now. But I'll be still involved, and that's a really, that the whole magazine is near and dear to my heart. So I'm glad that I get to continue on in some capacity there, while also kind of refocusing. But yeah, I'd love to write about other subjects too. I love food, and I love writing about food stuff, but I'd like to bring it into other areas of things that I'm interested in.
Nice.
Maybe not
No.
celebrity gossip.
Well, you never know. You never know. And if
You
you write
never
a
know.
if you write a screenplay, let me know. I have a background. Let me be director of photography. I have a background in film, so I'll help you shoot
Sounds
it.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, you're great, wonderful writer. So if you all want to read some of her stuff, I'll link at least this last article that I just referenced as well, so people
I will
can read it.
say if
Mhm.
anybody wants to read some stuff from me, but also just stuff from Edible, we'll be releasing a best of Edible digital edition on June 1st.
Oh,
And
perfect.
so me and my co-editor and my publisher, Stephanie Cameron, we all picked our 5 favorite articles of all time and wrote little introductions to each of them. And so that'll be available online. You can check out at ediblenm.com starting on June 1st.
Perfect timing. Thank you again so
Yeah.
much for coming on. This is amazing.
Thank you.
gonna hit pause and then we'll just debrief real quickly. But if you're listening, thank
Thanks.
you so much for listening. Bye.